I'm here with my girl, all right? I've been Rex blocked now, right? Are you... Well, this is the weirdest introduction I've ever had at a conference, right? Right, hi guys, I'm Finux. You may have seen me before for the past couple of years here. Yeah, I'm the guy that's going to be speaking to you today. So, I'm going to talk to you about... Stay still. Wow, early. So, I'm going to talk to you about privacy. Oh my god, not another privacy talk again. Anyone that's seen a couple of the talks that I've done recently knows that I've talked... God, there's 2 T-Rexes now, right? Everyone say hi to the T-Rexes. Hi! If you know what the joke is, you know how sick that actually is. So I'm going to talk to you about the evolution of privacy. Anyone that's seen the past couple of talks that I've done, I've talked about historical situations in a technical context. Is probably the best way of doing it. So last year I spoke here about what I call nukes and spooks, which is a bit about like 1950s theoretical physicists being a lot like security researchers today. I spoke at another conference recently about state surveillance during the 1500s. Believe it or believe it not, in the 1500s they were spying on people. And this time I'm going to talk about privacy, or the evolution of privacy. Because we all take it for granted, right? So I promise I'm not going to talk about the NSA much, or I'm not going to talk about Snowden much, but it's going to be more about the historical side of what privacy is and where it comes from, okay? Anyone's wondering, my name's Finux. I like stealing people's cakes. So privacy. I'm much like the lot of you, really, that this is my worst nightmare. Someone reading my Google search history to you all. Don't worry, I'm not going to do that, right? What I'm guessing is that if I do talk about the NSA, they'll either think that I'm a very bizarre terrorist or dyslexic. It's the latter. So yeah, privacy. So what is privacy? Well, apart from it being dead, which is a bit strange, right? Because very few people can actually tell me what privacy is, right? So who knows everything? I mean, apart from like your other half, but who knows everything? Google. So let's ask Google. Google seem to think this is privacy. I'm not going to read it for you, right? But of all these rights that we have to protect, this is the wealth of the knowledge that we're getting back from Google. Yay, thanks. So I tell you what, let's ask the experts, okay? You know, because there is privacy experts. There's people making money at it now, which seems a bit strange. So here's Arthur R. Miller. Arthur Miller was, let me pull my notes up, was a scholar for civil rights, professor at the New York University and the associate dean. Yeah, that's really helpful, right? Colin Bennett attempts to define the concept of privacy, generally not met with any success. You kind of see the narrative where we're going with this, right? This is by far my favorite one. He's the dean of Yale Law School, was the previous editor as well. Privacy is a value so complex, so entangled in competing and contradictory dimensions, so engorged with various and distinct meanings that I sometimes despair whether it can be usefully addressed at all. Wow. Fuck's sake, Robert. I mean, I actually think he probably just needs a hug. But that's you, Jason. You've not got glaucoma, it is fuzzy. And Judith Jarvis Thompson describes it as going off the edge of my slide. But basically, no one has a clear idea about what it is. If you're wondering who Judith Thompson is, she's a philosopher or was a philosopher. My favorite is Vint Cerf. Privacy may just actually be an anomaly. If anyone knows where this come from, this is a great sense of irony. Does anyone know who Vint Cerf is? Yeah? He's at the puzzle factory that we call Google. Evangelist there. Was involved in ARPANET. and went to a very low-key meeting with the FTC, was asked to describe about privacy, and basically said, hey, privacy is basically an anomaly. It's only been around for 150 years, blah, 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 blah. Unfortunately, the first time in history, the FTC meeting got a lot of publicity because of this quote, and it all blew up out of context. The strange thing is, after reading all of this, we could probably agree with Vint Cerf that if privacy is not an anomaly, it's certainly an anomaly trying to describe it. So yay, thanks experts. If we look at the law of privacy, surprisingly, in 1361, in the UK, well, England, there is a privacy law that comes into place, to stop eavesdropping and, peeping toms. This is another ironic twist, because if anyone knows where the term eavesdropper comes from, it comes from Henry VIII's, court, right? Henry VIII actually had faces carved into the eaves of the rafters, for his court, so that they knew that there was someone always watching. Everything that they said was always being looked at. It was a symbolic a lesson that he was teaching his people in his court, right? It's any wonder that Britain has like one CCTV camera for every 11 citizens now. They've just had like 500 years to get used to it, right? So the UN, right? The UN declares privacy as a human right, which is a bit interesting because it's actually quite difficult to describe what privacy is, never mind it being a human right. If I asked all of you to describe to me privacy in 3 words, I would have thousands of different words, right? Not everyone has the same idea of what privacy is, and yet we call it a human right, which is strange. This is what the UN sees human rights as. I'm not going to read all of this wall of text for you, and I'm sorry that I just like words. But you can look this shit up if you're interested, right? But basically, it is you should have the sanctity of your own home, and you shouldn't be spied on by the state. Yeah, how's that working out for you? We've come kind of a long way from when privacy was first talked about. So here's Aristotle. He did some of the first seminal work on privacy back in around 303 BC. That's before Christ, not before Columbus. And basically he wrote Politics. And in Politics, it's an 8-part series. He talks about the public sphere and the private sphere, and how politicians are public and how individuals are private. So the notion of privacy has been around before Christ, right? So we've gone from this concept of what privacy is to living in 1984, the perpetual version, right? I know it's a cliche to raise 1984 in a privacy talk. And 1984 is a good cliche when you're talking about state surveillance, but it's not such a good talk when you're talking about commercial surveillance, transactional surveillance, big business surveillance, big data, right? You want to look at Kafka's The Trail for that, right? So one of the ideas that we have in privacy is this famous saying that you've probably all said at some point, that we've all heard someone else say at some point, and we've definitely heard politicians say at some point, which is, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, right? Here's Goebbels. He's generally seen as the guy that pushed that, but you've got senators in the US Senate that have said this. You have MPs in the British Houses of Parliament. You also have Elizabeth I 500 years ago saying pretty much exactly the same thing, right? Politicians, monarchs, leaders have always been saying to you, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. So here's a controversial slide, because to some of you people in this room, he's a traitor. To the other half of you, he's a patriot. Frankly, I don't care. But he does have one of the best sound bites when it comes to nothing to hide, nothing to fear, which is akin to saying that you've got you don't want freedom of speech because you've got nothing to say. And it's a really good analogy of looking at where the problem lies. I'm going to talk a little bit about the nothing to fear argument later on. Yay! This is where we're living right now, right? But if you think about where privacy comes from, it's very hard to imagine that we had privacy when we lived in huts where we shared with everyone, right? Everyone lived in our own space. It's kind of a weird concept, because how would you have privacy if 10 of you lived in the same hut, right? You know, and it's predominantly because of the fire, right? This invention here made a lot of people live close together. And when the invention of internal chimneys came around and individual rooms started, we started to see an inclusion of privacy. But everything that we did as humans was always shared, right? I'm not arguing that privacy is something that comes afterwards. What I'm arguing is that privacy is something that we've always bartered, right? It's always played a second fiddle to other needs, such as the needs for safety or the need for security and so on and so forth. If you think about how crazy the world is, here is the Picts. These are predominantly my people, right? I'm Scot. Like to run around naked. Well, that's what the Romans say, right? So you can only take that with a pinch of salt. Interesting fact. The Picts stands for painted people. The Romans described these people as the Bretae, okay? The people that come from the painted people. Yes, this is where we get the term Britain from. So Britain actually refers to naked Scots running around with blue face paint. You learned it here first, right? Yeah. This doesn't count as nudity, right? It's art. Okay, we're okay with this. But sex is something that we've always done in front of, up until recently, we always did in front of people. Two lessons to take away from this: that there is always going to be someone tagging something, right? Even in the Romans. So bath, drink, and sex corrupt our bodies, but bath, drink, and sex make life worth living. There's always been rock and rollers as well, by the looks of it. But this is a lot of, if you look at Roman artwork, right, there is a lot of sex going on. And a lot of, it's not limited to opposite sexes, the same sex, animals, everything, right? The Romans were a little bit weird. But what's really interesting, we tend to think that privacy is not a thing at this point, right? But it turns out that there's still some tribes that we were able to do research upon in 1950. And what it seems is that tribes that, collections where people have very limited, not so many private rooms, they prefer to have sex outside. Whereas tribes that have private rooms prefer to have sex inside. So it does show that even though we get this idea that intimacy and privacy are the same thing, people will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their privacy in intimate situations. It's a far cry, though, from what we're told about life then, right? These public bathhouses. Interesting story. This is very cultural. I'm a Scot that moved to Germany just under 3 years ago. My girlfriend is a German. And she took me to a sauna. So anyway, we go to the sauna. I'm a very British kind of guy, right? So we get to the sauna, and she says to me, right, we need, it's a public sauna, right? She says to me, right, you need to take your clothes off. And there's me down into my shorts. No, naked. No, naked. No, and literally, to get naked in the sauna in front of everyone. Never felt kind of so vulnerable in all my life, right? But the Germans did not give a shit at all, right? No, like not one eye was batted. And they're all walking around, and I was like, wow, at least I'm not as bad as that, right? True story, right? So, yeah, if you go to Germany and you're up for the challenge, go and visit the saunas, right? It will, you'll feel good about yourself. Yeah, it was a bit weird. Oh, I'll tell you another anecdote about Chicago in a little while, so you can laugh at the Germans, but I've got one coming for you guys too. But even the most intimate situations of like pooping, right? This is like a very public affair in Roman colonies. Not just Rome though, right? All over the world. Because, the cost of individual toilets, of non-communal toilets, was the prohibitive reason. Not because, yay, we all like to have a conversation while you're pooping. Although, my first trip to America, I was in a layover in Chicago. Okay? And I go to the airport toilet. And I'm sitting there, and in the next cubicle, there is a guy on the phone to his son. Right? While he's pooping, and I'm the cubicle next to him. And he's chatting away like nothing's going on. Blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, your mum says this, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I'll be home at this time, blah, blah, blah. Hang on a second. Blah, 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 blah. So for a little while, I thought you people were a little bit weird, but it turns out it was just a weird guy in Chicago, right? But I'm not hanging around in toilets to check this, just so that we're sure. So yeah, we laugh at the Germans, but there's some guy in Chicago who likes to have a conversation while he's squeezing one off, right? They're around these public toilets, right? This is an ancient ruin of public toilets. Even in Britain, private toilets is something that comes in a lot later on into Britain, right? We have this outhouse mentality. You never wanted to be the first one to the toilet because you had the cold seat, right? But it's still something that this concept of intimacy at this moment is something that comes to life with architecture, not with human need, right? It's architecture that drives this, right? We go back to Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I had the first flushing toilet in England. And she didn't like it. She didn't use it. She preferred the chamber pot because it was different. Well, there's a few other reasons why it was different as well. She didn't like to have to get up and go somewhere else when she could ask someone to bring her toilet to her, the chamber pot. So she always preferred the easiness of the chamber pot over the flushing toilet. Flushing toilet comes in a lot later, but it's been in Britain for 550 years, right? The Vikings also had a very shared experience, right? This living around the fire again. Like I say, it is the invention of chimneys that starts to bring in individual private rooms, right? And the reason being is it's awkward when you go to your mate's house and he smokes you out, right? And that's what it boils down to. If you don't design your house right, you're going to basically choke everyone in there. So eventually the chimneys come in, then we can move heat around the building properly, then we can have individual rooms, blah, 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 blah. Hospital beds, right? So how we slept has changed predominantly over the past 200 years, okay? Maybe even longer. But how we slept as a species was collectively, because, you've guessed it, the cost of beds. So you'd have a big bed with many families staying together. And in hospitals, it's exactly the same. So we see this now, this individual hospital bed. But it isn't until the Black Death that killed over 1 million people in Britain that we see individual hospital beds being used. In hospitals then, you would stay as many to a bed as you would be comfortable with house guests. That was pretty much the rule. It was no different. They never thought about the sanitation reason of it. They considered it to be about, you can't, they just couldn't even see the wood for the trees, right? Because everyone sleeps in the same bed, right? And then the Black Death came, killed so many people collectively, that things had to change. And then we see the individual, beds coming into play. It's really interesting, the communal bed concept, because it seems a little bit alien to us, right? That you would share the bed with everyone, including your visitors, right? So it's not just you, your wife, your children, your grandmother, her mother, and everyone else. Also, your visitor, his friends, his family. Everyone would share the same bed. It's a very alien concept now, because you wouldn't share the bed with your mother-in-law nowadays, right? But yet this is something that we do. But yet the communal bed, it's a lot like Facebook, to be honest with you. While I was writing this talk, this popped up in my timeline. I'll give you a minute to just have a quick read about what this person posted on Facebook. I can see some people squinting, so I'll read it out, okay? The case of the deadly dildo. When a bit of Saturday morning playtime results in spending the day in Wrexham Hospital having a nice pink vibrator surgically removed from your bowel areas whilst it's still vibrating. If you can't on a Saturday, when can you? Facebook, right? If you're looking, she only posted it in the morning, I saw it in the afternoon, I don't know this person, this is where I blanked everything out. Nearly 3,000 shares in the morning, right? Internet fame. I'm not sure she appreciated how quick something like this would happen, right? If we make mistakes with privacy, the problem that we have, we've always been able to make mistakes with privacy. The problem is now is that when you do make them, they escalate so quickly. So yeah. But Facebook is a lot like the communal bed, right? We see arguments, we see fighting, we see love, we see hate. This notion of how we share our intimacy is very like the communal bed. I would like to claim credit for that, but it was my girlfriend that pointed it out to me, and I think it's a wonderful analogy that the Facebook is really the communal bed. We are kind of going back a little bit. But medicine is another really interesting area of where privacy has evolved and changed. This man is not proposing, by the way. I'm not sure how you do it in your country. We don't do that in Scotland either when we're proposing. This is about giving a gynecological exam. And it's called the compromise position. This is in a medical journal. And what this is designed to do is to give the woman privacy during the gynecological exam. But you can see the thinking that went into it, especially with it being named the compromise position. Like there's some trade to be made, right? We've compromised, we've made a deal. It's really bizarre that we gauged privacy, the right to have some dignity, as something that needed to be traded and bartered, right? The German Constitution has dignity as one of its founding principles, right? It's one of the only constitutions that I've ever met, ever seen, that guarantees the person to be treated with dignity. But yeah, medical science has had the same problem, right? It's continually trying to understand how to engage with someone's privacy, their right to be private. And remember, we find it very hard to actually describe what privacy is, but we're still trying to protect it at the same time. And I kind of feel that there's some disjointment there in a lot of the ways. Originally, how I came to think about privacy and how complex it is, don't worry, I'm not a Catholic, but I'm sure some of you are in here. The confessional. Interestingly enough, the confessional has been around in the Catholic faith pretty much from the beginning. However, the confessional used to be public. It was never in a quiet room with just you and your priest, right? But the very notion of the confessional that we see today, in some ways, is the epitaph of private and public information. I mean, so much so that we respect the right, the privacy rights of a Catholic and a priest, far more so than we would respect the rights of a doctor and of a psychiatrist and a patient. That's how much instilled it is upon us. But you used to have to do your confessional in front of everyone. I imagine no one did anything wrong, is what basically happened at that point. Do you have anything to confess? No. No. All's good. Yeah. So this is kind of like an interesting thing that comes into play. Secluded reading, quiet reading. Believe it or believe it not. I'm sure you will believe it, but illiteracy has been a problem in the Western world for a very long time. In the UK, we only eradicated it in 1987. To give you a rough idea. But previously to this, books were very rare, and when you got them, you would share them, you would read them, because finding someone who was capable of reading and finding someone that had access to a book, you would read to everyone. Once the printed press came into being, the access to materials became far more rapidly accessible. right? I know we look at the internet as a revolutionary invention that changed the world. But I can guarantee you the printed press changed more things in the long term. Of course, the history with the internet is still going on, and printed press is dying out, right? But even this reading, this solitude reading, this sanctity in reading, is actually from a religious virtue. It isn't, yes, it's access to material, but this virtue of solitude is a religious concept, is a Christian concept in some ways. And when the church started to talk about the sanctity of silent learning, then we started to see it become popular. Interesting one. I did a talk about state surveillance and Reformation throughout Europe. If you're interested, you can catch it on YouTube somewhere. And I really wish I had found this information while I was doing this talk. So state surveillance, the old enemy, right? I only chose 500 years because it was a dice throw, right? There is so many history moments about state surveillance, about control being put upon its citizens, trying to find out what the citizens know. But this is an example. This is that awkward moment when Lincoln signs off on tapping the telegraph systems of the United States of America during the Civil War. So this is a letter from Edwin Stanton, and basically it's asking for authority to intercept telegraphs in this country. And Lincoln just scribbles on the top, the Secretary of War has my authority to exercise his discretion in the matter within mentioned. Just goes to show you that the Secretary of War has been spying on you for a long, long time, right? That broad consent is something that keeps on popping up. Really interesting when it comes to states, though, and privacy. States really like to invade people's privacy, right? This concept that you have an idea that's inside your head and that they don't know about is a bit of a problem. If you look at when Aristotle talks about the public and private spheres of life, he has this notion of what democracy is. And you can't get two polar views of what democracy is than Aristotle and Madison. So if we look at how Aristotle sees democracy and how privacy plays into this, Aristotle sees democracy as having the one goal to enhance the state, right? To empower and betterment the state. Principles that we all sort of agree with, right? And what he argues about is that you can't have extreme poverty in those type of states, right? Because if everyone has a say and everyone has a vote, then extremely poor people will vote for what they need, what is in their own best interest. And because there's going to be more extremely poor people than there is going to be extremely wealthy people, the poor will always win. So the only way to empower that, I'm going to say a dirty word in this country, but it's the welfare state, right? And Aristotle, in 302 and 320 BC, makes an argument about the welfare state. We don't have a welfare state and we have extreme poverty. We will never be able to have democracy because people's own personal opinions will interfere with what's best for the state. Madison, on the other hand, has a completely different idea. He basically argues that the opulent wealthy need to be protected from the extreme poor. And if they need to be safeguarded in a lot of ways. And it sort of carries on. We now see states that are happy to invade other countries, but are not so happy when countries spy on them. And we're in a situation globally where we're seeing huge amounts of acts of war, as the UN would see them, on other countries. But the minute that a retaliation is done in the same vein, an escalation. France is a great example, right? You know, happy to invade Africa, but not its privacy. It's awfully cheeky coming from a Brit saying this, granted, right? Do you know what I mean? I mean, imperialism has a lot to answer for, right? And I'm not saying that Britain is innocent. In fact, I'm never saying that, right? But it is what it is. So you all look really bored, so I'm just going to hit with the conclusions, right? This was one of the hardest talks that I had to research. I've done, like I say, I talked about 1950s theoretical physicists and the Manhattan Project. I've talked about state surveillance during the 1450 to 1550. And this by far was the most difficult thing that I've had to research. Mainly because no one has a fucking clue. Right? When it boils down to it, when we talk about privacy, we really talk about privacy from here. We don't globalize the problem. We don't decenter from the problem. We look at it as one state spying on another state. And we don't look at what privacy is, how we got here, and what happened. And this is because the conceptualization, I spelt it in the American version if you guys are interested, right? This is because I'm transatlantic. We're allergic to Z's in England, right? But conceptualization of privacy is incredibly hard, right? As I said to you earlier on, if I ask you to describe me what privacy is, you may have 3 words. You know, it's a bit like the joke. You know, describe yourself in 3 words. Okay, lazy. Right? But it's much the same if I ask you to describe me privacy. You know, it's something that if I take from you, you will have extreme emotions. You are likely to have physiological reactions to your privacy being spied upon, right? Your privacy being stripped away from you. But yet if I ask you now to describe it, you don't have a universal description. You may all may say freedom at some point within that description. Maybe. But that's not guaranteed either. And yet this is something that I don't think is dead, but I think is evolving and is a endangered species in a lot of ways, right? But the problem is how do you defend something that you can't describe? And the conceptualization of privacy is incredibly, incredibly difficult. If you want to know more about it, Daniel Solov's taxonomy of privacy is a wonderful start. And he talks about the same problems. That privacy is one of these rights that is incredibly hard to describe. Privacy, like, it comes from private, right? But the right to private property is a very strange right in comparison to every other right, right? The right of freedom doesn't deny, the right of free speech doesn't deny anyone else's right of free speech, but the right of property does deny you the right of property. But this is an interesting paper. Privacy really, Daniel Stove looks at arguing about privacy as more of a relation of things that are related. They don't share the same property but are related. So what you consider privacy to be, people tend to mistake intimacy and privacy, right? This is an example of what Daniel Stove is talking about. That intimate things may be private, but not all private things are intimate, right? And if we try and look at what builds privacy, what are privacy to us, there are a collection of things that are not identical, that are not labeled the same, but are related. They do look similar. They're like brothers and sisters and so on and so forth. How we look at privacy is very strange too, right? Because animals don't seem to have privacy, and if you own animals, you don't seem to care about your privacy either. Literally, no fucks were given in this picture, right? Absolutely none at all. But it's strange, right? Anyone that's had children as well, right? You know, they don't care about your privacy either. It's something we teach them, right? It's a value that we teach them. But it's a value that you can't describe. But we teach it, right? And then we wonder why it's an endangered species. You can't really talk about privacy without talking about Jeremy Bentham. Does anyone know who this guy is? Fucking one person. Well done. This guy is kind of cool, but kind of sucks at the same time. So, he was a philosopher. He's pretty much regarded as the founder of modern utilitarianism, right? What he's really famous for, and this is when I'm going to kill this pronunciation, but the panopticon, right, is a type of system designed to handle prisoners or the internet. I'll explain that in a second. But beforehand, when we had prisoners, what they did was keep them in cells, in dungeons, underground. And the problem is that when you can't see what your prisoners are doing, that's probably a good time to start digging the escape tunnel, right? So they had a lot of escaped prisoners because they couldn't monitor them, right? And the cost of having a guard for every cell was just infeasible. So Bantam designed a prison system where the guard tower, all cells were above ground, they weren't underground, they were opened up, lighted, right, so that you could see inside the cells, and then they have this pillar in the middle with the guard tower on top. And the idea is that the prisoners cannot see inside the guard tower, but the guard tower has an unrestricted view inside. And what this means is that the prisoners have to adapt to the concept that they don't know if someone's watching, but they have to assume that someone is watching. Okay? It's 1984, right? You're never told that Big Brother is always watching in the book. You presume that Big Brother's always watching. But this is this concept in a nutshell, right? The prisoners had to change. This is a prison cell in Cuba, by the way, but there is these all over the world. It's a bit like the internet, right? How many people... I know that how I use the internet changed massively from when I first started using the internet as a child to knowing that the internet is being massively monitored, right? That how you search for things, how you look for things has changed. It's not that I'm on some list, probably, but, I mean, you'd be doing something wrong nowadays if you weren't on a list, let's be honest with you, like, boring bastard. But how you change, how you search for things, will change now. You know, you think twice before sticking Al-Qaeda into Google, right? Doesn't mean you're a terrorist. But the fact that it's being watched changes the behavior. You know, if we look at the original digital natives and how they use the internet, compared to what we're seeing at today's digital natives, we're going to see a difference in how they use this utility. Kind of reminds anyone about what we're living right now, right? I've got nothing to hide. How many times, I know you've heard me talk about it, but now we're going to get to the nuts and crux of it. It's strange how a lot of people that say I've got nothing to hide close their curtains, right? So the problem with the nothing to hide argument is that it's based on an underlying assumption that privacy is used to hide bad things. That is the basis premise of I've got nothing to hide, so I've got nothing to fear. If you're doing something wrong, only then have you got something to fear about an invasion of privacy. That's the whole entire argument in a nutshell. That it presumes that privacy is only used to hide bad things. That's all privacy is used for. That's all that argument allows the scope of that argument. However, it kind of, if we arc back to Snowden's argument about it's akin to saying that you've got you don't want freedom of speech because you've got nothing to say, but it's even more deep-rooted than this. People who are using this argument inherently are arguing that I don't care about everyone else's rights as long as it doesn't happen to me. That's what ultimately is being argued here. That you wouldn't allow someone to take away free speech, not necessarily because you might have something to say, but because it takes your neighbor's rights away. But we don't protect privacy in the same way. It's been instilled in us that privacy is an attack upon security, right? That you can't have security, you can't have security with privacy, right? There's nothing to actually substantiate that. That's just what we call conventional wisdom. You know, because if absolute degradation of privacy guaranteed you security, then nobody would be getting killed in prisons, right? Everyone would be safe in a prison, right? That's not true either. I know this is a bit of like logic where it's a bit like saying, you know, look, the reason that we have snow in cities is because of snowplows, right? People who mistake causation and correlation, all I'm saying is that they all end up dead. But the reality of it is that if an extraction of privacy guaranteed safety, we wouldn't have had any privacy to start off with. So yeah, people who are using that I've got nothing to hide are basically saying that privacy is used to hide bad things. And I'm not sure that's necessarily true. If you're really interested in this whole notion about by far the best work is Daniel Stover again, seminal work really, on I've Got Nothing to Hide. It's a paper that he wrote a little while ago. 29 pages, very, very worth a read if you're interested, because he does a very good job of trying to break down what privacy is, more importantly trying to break down the concept, the argument, I've got nothing to hide. Because we hear this every day, right? Your politicians will tell you this all day long. Whenever they get caught out spying on people, it's because you've got nothing to hide, right? I'm not saying that intelligence agencies don't have the right to intercept people. What I'm saying is it would be nice if they used the legal instruments in place to do it, right? You know, no one's saying that people can't be wiretapped. What I'm saying is that you bet your ass you should go to the judge, right, and make it happen. What we're arguing about is that the case of that they are just doing it without legal supervision, and there is no oversight. And I think that there's a problem there. And with that, I've finished. And if you have any questions, now would be the time to give them. Okay, thank you. Is that it? No more questions? Oh, I'm not sure if there's a mic, so I'm going to have to repeat. So the question, I struggle to hear you over everyone moving out, right? But I believe the question is, how can you have a non-biased oversight committee while everything they're being taught is from a biased source? It's an interesting question. It's an interesting problem, and certainly worthy of a debate. The fact of the matter is that your oversight committee has been lied to, and there is punitive processes in place to do that. To penalize people that lie to Senate, that oversight, yet they're not being enforced. You know, we can name a few intelligence people who have lied under oath, which would be a jail term if you did it. I mean, you would go to jail if you lied under oath. So, yeah, I think following the punitive measures would be a good start. I hope that helps. Any more?